coming to you from a beautiful sunny afternoon on the Oregon coast. I see that it's the end of the day for some of us, and over here it's mid-afternoon. I am so grateful for the accompaniment that many of you with the Poor People's Campaign and Freedom Church of the Poor and the Deaconess community provided to me and my ministry and my community in the past few years. I'm just going to provide a quick overview of what happened with us and what the result was, in no small part thanks to your prayers, your notes of encouragement, your letters, things that we were able to offer up to a federal court, and also to help us keep our chins up as we were fighting for the right to care for each other. So during the pandemic, early days of the pandemic, Oregon passed a law and then directed cities to invite churches to open their parking lots for hygiene stations for people who were living in cars. And our city wrote a letter to all of the churches in city limits and asked us to open our parking lot to become a hygiene station. And we responded, and the next few months saw a big increase in people coming to use the porta potty and the hand washing station. It turned out that the city had closed all of the park bathrooms and every public water fountain and every public bathroom in the entire city during the pandemic. And so the church's porta potty and hand washing station became really the main place for people to be able to prevent the spread of disease and to relieve themselves. Well, that kind of backfired, because it turned out that none of the other churches in the entire town took up the city's request. And so the neighbors wrote a petition to the city asking to shut down the hand washing station and the car parking in the area, with a bunch of really offensive anti-homelessness language. And the timing of when the petition ended up going to the city council was such that by the time the city council received it, they only meet once a month, really. The program that the state had been funding for hand washing stations and porta potties was already ended, and the safe car camping was already ended. But the city council used that petition as an excuse to pass an ordinance to prohibit churches in city limits from providing food to the poor free of charge. They said that they had a mandate from the citizens of the community to shut down caring services or humanitarian services at churches, and went so far as to pass an ordinance that defined churches as only being able to provide the services of preaching sermons and singing worship songs is the only lawful activities in the church, and any other activity would require a conditional use permit. The conditional use permit costs $3,000 and has to go before a planning commission of men that were handpicked against this particular Episcopal church. So, of course, we didn't stop feeding people. For almost 20 years, the town has had a network of churches that provide at least one hot meal a day, every day of the week. And during the pandemic, one by one, each of them closed. They couldn't figure out how to abide by the health authority regulations, or they lost their volunteers as people were locked indoors or staying socially distanced. And so over the course of a few weeks, it turned out that the same church that I'm talking about ended up having all 7 days of the week of the community kitchen. So when the ordinance was passed to prohibit a church from sharing food for free, A, that's ridiculous, right? But B, it was really targeted against this one congregation. And at that point, the Catholic diocese, the Episcopal diocese, the Oregon ELCA synod, the Deaconess community, and some of your ministries or your churches or your seminaries wrote letters of support telling the city council, hey, this is something that churches do. Feeding the hungry, sharing meals together, breaking bread and fellowship is all part of the Christian faith. We're ordered to feed the hungry. It's how we live out our service of discipleship. And before there was Holy Communion or Eucharist, there were meals together, right? And unfortunately, the city council, their volunteers, not very well read up on these sorts of things. I see some of you talking about, what about church and state? What about the Constitution, right? Not very well read up on these things. And the ordinance wasn't in good faith. It was founded out of animosity towards this particular church. And so unfortunately, we had to go to federal court to ask for declarative relief, meaning not looking for money damages, not looking for a bunch of cash, but looking for a judge to say, hey, targeting just churches, right? It wasn't that like you couldn't provide meals without a health inspection. We already were a licensed kitchen by the Oregon State Health Authority. It wasn't any nonprofit can't serve meals. It was only churches can't provide food. And within a small radius of about 2 blocks from us, we have an Elks Lodge, a VFW hall, a Boy Scout hall, and the senior center that all serve meals to their members. And within 2.5 or 3 blocks, we have the city hall itself that had a coffee machine and donuts out, right? Free food to the public. And none of them are health inspected, just the church. Makes me laugh. But anyway, we filed a federal case. And at that point, we needed to organize our people to write declarations explaining why the community kitchen, either volunteering there or eating there or participating in the ministry, was an expression of faith, or the way a family survived or an individual survived and was able to get back on their feet, or to accomplish a goal of living a more dignified life. We talked about how it was crime prevention. We have essentially no petty crime in our community because everyone has the food they need. We talked about how people's came to faith or were able to express their faith through participation in eating meals together and cooking and serving meals together. And in all, I think we had almost 40 declarations come in, as well as letters of support from congregations, ministries, synods, dioceses, and seminaries. And after a several-year wait, we finally had the summary judgment motion hearing Valentine's weekend in the district court closest to us, the federal district court closest to us, which is several hours away. And the courthouse was packed. I was overjoyed by the amount of love in that courtroom for us. We had people who traveled sometimes 6 hours or brought their entire Bible study group to come sit in that courthouse. It was pouring down rain, but people had umbrellas down the street. They actually had to take all the chairs out of like the jury section and put people in the witness areas and put extra chairs in the aisles. They opened the doors and set up a second room for people to observe. And 100% of the people who came that day were there to stand up for the power of feeding each other. And the city attorney was the only person there who was not there to try to feed people or to promote the idea that we belong to each other and care for each other. So I mentioned that was Valentine's Day. And it takes a while to get a ruling. You don't get the ruling right at the very moment, like you might on court TV, right? Or on a movie. It just so happened that the judge published his decision on Wednesday of Holy Week, the night before Maundy Thursday, when we commemorate Jesus' command to love one another and to share the meal. And it was, I think, like 4 or 5 in the afternoon. It was like, the last thing that he probably did that day, Wednesday of Holy Week, March 27th of 24. And it said, the city of Brookings is fortunate to have the good people of St. Timothy Episcopal Church and the Community Kitchen to care for its town so well. It found on every point that the so-called benevolent meal ordinance was contrary to the Religious Land Use and Practices Act, contrary to the free expression of religion, and ordered the city to repeal the ordinance and allow the free sharing of food from the church. And so the city took its sweet time, and finally on Christmas Eve 24, the so-called benevolent meal ordinance was repealed, and we started off 2025 no longer accruing daily fines for sharing food with our neighbors. And there was a moment early on after the ordinance was passed, when had been fined and cited for continuing to share meals, where we weren't sure if we were going to show up to the church and find it padlocked. We weren't sure if the city was going to try to repossess the church with a tax lien for the unpaid fines and fees of $720 a day. And your prayers, your messages of love, your verses that you sent us in such an organized fashion where we shared one every single day, they really gave us the sense of that it's not just us versus city council. We have our whole faith tradition. We have all of our faith traditions together on the side of sharing our common humanity and lifting one another up and making sure that no belly is hungry. And that moral support and your prayers and your letters provided such important support so that we could continue to walk forward with our community towards the victory that we eventually received. So I wanted to thank you and share that with you. And if you're involved in a meal ministry, it's likely that yours is larger than ours. We ended up on Fox News and the New York Times, and we're really a small community kitchen in a small rural town in a fishing village on the Oregon coast. But I wanted to tell you that if you find yourself similarly looking at bad, capitalist pro-business laws or nasty, hostile city councils trying to oppose your ministries, keep the faith, continue to do what's right, and continue to make sure that no bellies get hungry. And thank you so much for your support to us. I so appreciate you.